Well, good morning, everyone. This is George Spees with the Pennsylvania Office of Open Records. Welcome to this morning's webinar where we're going to be talking about basics of the Sunshine Act, or what's otherwise known as Pennsylvania's Open Meetings Law. A couple preliminaries before we get started. If you've never attended one of these webinars before, it's basically a PowerPoint presentation with me talking, and the PowerPoints are available on the OOR's website. Go over to the training tab and scroll down, and you can find all of the PowerPoints that we use for our training. You're welcome to use those as you see fit. Maybe you have a colleague who couldn't attend this morning. Perhaps you're conducting some local training, or maybe just for your own future reference, it would be useful. You're more than welcome to download the PowerPoints and save them locally. These sessions are also recorded. There are some issues lately with bandwidth and our ability to save those recordings. So I don't want to make any promises I currently can't keep. I need to talk to the IT people to see where things stand. But it may be possible to get a copy of the recording of this session, again, for future reference. I need to see where things stand on that. A couple days ago that it was an issue. I'm not sure whether it's been corrected or not. Finally, as far as questions go, you're more than welcome to submit questions using the chat feature as we're going through the presentation. Two things, though. We're talking about the Sunshine Act, so let's stay on topic. And more importantly, if you can keep your questions as brief and concise as possible, that would be very helpful. Sometimes folks will type in several paragraphs, and it's just awkward for me to sit here, read through it while everyone else is waiting patiently. If it looks like you have something that is unusually complex or specific to your situation, we'll do one of two things. We'll take the conversation offline. Information to contact the office is on the screen right now. Call in or send us an email, and one of the administrative staff typically can help you out. If you stump them, your question will be escalated to one of the executive staff, and they're very good about getting back to you. Typically within 24 hours, someone will get back to you and respond to your questions. The other option is that we'll wait until the end of this presentation, and I'll try to come back to it and see what we can do for the good of the order. Pardon me. So I think that takes care of all the preliminaries. Let's jump in right now and talk about the Sunshine Act. I think it's important to emphasize, just why the Sunshine Act is vital. And this is somewhat altruistic, I admit, but it's taken right out of the preamble of the Sunshine Act. Let me just go through it real quick. The Open Meetings Law represents the right of the public to be present at all meetings of agencies, witness the deliberation, policy formulation, and decision-making of those agencies, because it's vital to the enhancement and proper functioning of the democratic process. And secrecy in public affairs undermines the faith of the public in government and the public's effectiveness in fulfilling its role in a democratic society. Okay, like I said, very altruistic, but it's interesting in that I've had the opportunity to travel internationally, and this is one of those things that's somewhat unique to the United States, and it's a little overwhelming in that you can go to some countries and this is not the case. You do not have the right to attend the meetings of your government and stand up and possibly object to what they're doing. So it's unique in that Pennsylvania has this law where it's part of our democratic right as a free society to stand up and call our public officials to task for issues where we may not be in agreement. So we take it seriously here, and hopefully you do as well, and that's why you're attending. I like to think that the Sunshine Act can be broken down into three critical components. Now, there are other facets of this law that are important. I acknowledge that, but when someone contacts our office and they want to know about the Sunshine Act, I usually lead them through a conversation that focuses on these three elements, which we'll be talking about in detail throughout the presentation. First, there needs to be advance notice of the public meeting and instructions on how to attend. And that's, whether it's the physical component of the meeting or if there's an online component. How do I log into this meeting? I have the right to observe deliberations, and we'll talk about what that term deliberation means. And then I have the right to comment prior to any decisions being made by public officials. I have the right to weigh in and give my opinion, express my observations, and so forth. Okay, so we'll be talking about these three in greater detail. But let's start by talking about who is covered by this act. And like I tell most people, when you're trying to understand a law, just reading the law itself oftentimes can be a challenge. There may be language in there that appears vague. There may be apparent conflicts that, between one provision versus another. And I always recommend that you take a look at the definition section of a law, because quite often those definitions can shed light on that vague language, or it can clarify what you would otherwise think to be conflicting language. So let's take a look at the definition section of the Sunshine Act and, how it applies. And it essentially says it applies to any state or local government body and all committees. And then it goes on to say that those committees perform an essential government function. And then they exercise authority to take official action. And under the definition of official action, a separate definition, it includes the term making recommendations. So let's break this down. State or local government body, when we talk about the state, we pretty much know what that means. Local government body, we're talking about cities, boroughs, townships, school districts. An extension of school districts would be charter schools, authorities created by statute, any government entity that can have an impact on the decision-making process for a particular jurisdiction. Okay, and then it comes down to, and let's talk about committees real quick, because this is a question that comes up often. Is my committee covered by the Sunshine Act? Do we need to open it up to the public? There is a misunderstanding that the committee must have a quorum of elected officials on it. Okay, and that is not the case. A committee does not necessarily need to have any public officials as part of its membership. So when we talk about a quorum of a committee, we're talking about just that. Who's on the committee, and is there a majority present so that they can make decisions if necessary? No public officials would need to be on that committee, because we move to the next component of this definition, that perform an essential government function. Okay, now what does that mean? Big subjective phrase there. Let me give you an example that I like to use. Let's say that there is an ad hoc committee that is appointed by some township supervisors because the local girls softball team has won the state championship, and we want to have a celebration. Okay, we're going to have a parade, and then we're going to meet at Borough Park to have, a cookout of some sort where we recognize their accomplishment. Okay, it's certainly an accomplishment worthy of recognition, but to argue that it's an essential government function, I think we're going to have an uphill battle there. Okay, so I would argue that this ad hoc committee would not meet the definition of an essential government function, thus moving it off the table when it comes to whether or not its gatherings should be subject to the Sunshine Act. But if we change that up a little bit, let's say that our committee is a standing committee and it is tasked with periodically meeting to review all the local ordinances to ensure that language is consistent, that they make sense, that they're still relevant, that they're not in conflict with any state statutes or federal statutes and the like. And then they go back and make recommendations to the elected body as to any modifications, deletions, or additions to those local ordinances. I would argue that that is an essential government function and that the gatherings of that particular committee would be subject to the sunshine because of that essential government function language. And then we come down to exercising the authority to take official action. Okay, now you're thinking, why wouldn't a committee be tasked with taking official action? Well, there are some committees that are appointed just to gather data, just to gather information, that we're looking into funding possibilities for a capital improvements project that we have. And we just want to appoint a group to go out there and see what's available. We don't need any recommendations. We don't need you to take any action per se. We just want to know what's available so we can educate ourselves with that, and then we'll take the necessary action. Okay, that committee, which is tasked with simply gathering information, is not tasked with taking any official action. Thus, again, they would not rise to this definition that we're currently looking at. Sometimes, sadly to say, the best way for a problem to go away is to simply appoint a committee and hope that you never hear from them again. There are municipalities that do this. It can be, an accepted practice. Just, we'll appoint a committee. Okay, so you do that, and the committee never meets, or it never really comes to any action per se. So you could argue that that committee, because of its inactivity, is not subject to the Sunshine Act. And then, finally, I do want to emphasize, repeat this, that within the definition of official action, which is included in the Sunshine Act, it includes that term, making recommendations. So if it's an essential government function and the committee is tasked with coming back to the elected board and making recommendations, then that would qualify as official action, and the gatherings of that committee would more than likely be covered by the Sunshine Act. Okay, we have kind of a big question popped up here. Let me come over and take a look at it. Okay, scenario. County commissioners form an advisory committee comprised of citizens tasked by the commissioners with providing a recommendation on whether or not and how to repurpose a county-owned library building. Commissioners announced that meetings of the advisory committee are not subject to the Sunshine Act and that the public will not be permitted to attend. Would you agree? Well, you're not going to get me to commit to that, unfortunately. I can't give you a legal opinion here. I think, we're going to talk about enforcement, but it would be up to you, if you disagree, to seek redress there. On the surface, I think you would apply what we've just talked about as far as the definition of the Sunshine Act. The next slide, we're going to get into this in a little more detail. So let's take a look at that. Let me advance, and hopefully it will give you some insight here. Is your committee covered? Okay, well, we're going to take a look at case law. Now, unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, there's not a lot of case law when it comes to the Sunshine Act. People just, don't have the resources to sue, and that's basically what it entails. However, I will say that in recent years, there has been an uptick in case activity, in legal activity, when it comes to the Sunshine Act. But I'm going to talk about a seminal case that goes back several years. It's called Ristow versus Casey. Casey would be Governor Robert Casey from several years ago. And in the Ristow case, Mr. Ristow sued the state government And there was a decision written by the Pennsylvania Commonwealth Court. In that decision, there's some very useful language that expands on what we were just talking about with this definition. And here are some questions that need to be answered, again, in rising importance. They build on one another. Okay, first offhand, does the committee have decision-making authority? Very similar to what we were talking about. Some committees are appointed just to gather information versus others that have decision-making authority. Are the members appointed by the board, and are they authorized to act on its behalf? Okay, now you're thinking, well, why wouldn't they be? There are some boards that are self-appointing. And for instance, our questioner mentions public libraries. Depending on how those libraries were originally formed in their charter or whatever, it may have been that they are self-appointing, meaning that the nexus between that library board and the local elected board is very weak if it exists at all. And if there is, for instance, maybe back when the library was formed, the board members were appointed by the local elected officials, maybe, okay? However, if a vacancy were to occur on the library board, it's self-perpetuating, it's self-appointing, meaning that the remaining members of the library board are responsible for going out and finding another volunteer. And, it's one of those deals, as long as there aren't any problems, don't bother us. So there's, little, if any, activity or oversight from the elected officials within that jurisdiction. Okay, well, here then, you could argue that the members are not appointed by the elected board, and they're not authorized to act on its behalf. They can only act on matters affecting the library, not the rest of the municipality. Okay, are the recommendations pursuant to statute, ordinance, or regulatory authority, whereby the making or enactment of laws, policies, or regulations is the end result? Okay, I think that this is probably the most important aspect of this definition, because it basically says that the reason you're meeting is due to a statutory requirement, and the result of your deliberations, the result of your meetings is or are recommendations that are based on statute or laws, okay? And it's going to result in, well, the potential exists to result in enactment of laws, policies, or regulations, okay? So you see that. Using my previous example, girls softball team, you would not find a statute that says if your girls softball team wins the state championship, you need to have a parade and a cookout at the township park. Okay, just doesn't exist. Okay, so you cannot make that nexus where you're applying this aspect raised by the court. Okay, and I don't want to take away from any girls softball team that may have won the state championship. It's just that it's not based on law. And that's what the court is basically saying here. Now, all this being said, if you're unsure, my recommendation is to lean towards transparency. Open up your meeting to the public. Two reasons. First is that this is the Office of Open Records. We are the state's office for transparency, state and local government. So of course I'm going to say that. But the second reason is more pragmatic. It may be inconvenient to open up a meeting where you have to advertise, you have to account for seating, you have to account for people commenting and so forth. All right. It's easier to just, meet behind closed doors. Everyone can talk. We can decide what to do and move on. Okay. But the alternative is that if someone objects and they pursue a legal remedy, you could find yourself standing before a judge and you have to pass what I call the straight face test, meaning can you explain why you did not open your meeting to the public before a judge while keeping a straight face? And will that judge agree with you? If not, you could find yourself much more inconvenienced than the effort it would have taken to open your meeting to the public. Okay, so I recommend lean towards transparency. Number one, because it's the right thing to do. Number two, because it may be the best course of action from a practical perspective in the long run. Okay, again, moving on. We have to answer the question, is it a meeting? It's funny sometimes, let's just say it's amusing because we hear this a lot, where we'll get an email or a phone call. Hey, I saw 3 of my township supervisors down at the restaurant the other morning having breakfast. That's illegal, isn't it? Well, no. I mean, they're allowed to have breakfast together. It just depends what they're talking about, okay? If they're talking about family, if they're talking about weather, if they're talking about, the girls' softball team or the Phillies or whatever, that's okay. All right. They're allowed to have gatherings. It's just that they cannot talk about the business of the township while they're together because that would be considered deliberation. Okay, so let's talk about this in the context of public meetings. Can they phone in? Yes and no. Okay, now let me think about this. Under the township code and the borough code's an exception. Okay, the first class township code and the borough code, a quorum must be present, physically present, in order for it to be a public meeting. Okay, anyone beyond the quorum can phone in or Skype in or whatever. Okay, but the quorum must be physically present. Further, anyone phoning in, it must be a direct connection, meaning you can't have someone sitting there with a cell phone up to their ear relaying information back and forth. They have to be able to hear everyone directly, and everyone must be able to hear the person phoning in. Now, when it comes to townships and school districts and the like, you can have people phoning in order to meet a quorum, okay? But again, those direct connections must also be there, okay? Question has popped up. One of my board members wants us to email or text all of them whenever we want to purchase anything and get at least 2 of the 3 to approve it. I say that is a violation of the law. Am I correct? While I can't definitively say whether that's a violation or not, I think as we proceed through the presentation today, you would find that that practice is problematic, okay? They are essentially making decisions outside of the public eye if it takes a quorum of affirmative votes to make a decision. And that decision, because they're using email and not making that decision in a public setting, that could be a problem, okay? And I'm sorry that I can't give you a definitive yes or no answer. You're not going to get that from me because, number one, I can't give legal opinions. Number two, there's always 2 sides to the story. So, okay, so a school board member can phone in and does not need to be present. That is correct. There needs to be a physical presence for it to be a public meeting, but members can phone in if they're not able to attend. Okay, that is acceptable. Okay, then we need to answer the question, is there deliberation? Well, again, we go to the definition section, and it defines deliberation is any discussion that could lead to a decision. Answer the next question. Is there decision making? A decision making is essentially a vote. Okay, so if you're having a discussion over agency business, that could conceivably, and that word could is in there. It doesn't say that they have to make a decision. It just says that the result of the discussion could lead to a decision. That's deliberation. And then if there is a decision, it's usually done in the form of a vote, official action. Okay, and then we come back to the question that was very timely. Beware of email meetings, okay? And this usually occurs when there's a new board seated at the beginning of the year, and typically the chairperson comes from a business background, and they're used to getting things done efficiently, email being a good example of that. It's like, look, rather than us having to wait for the public meeting and taking a public vote on this, why don't we just circulate an email? If you approve of the purchase, vote on it, let us know your thoughts. And if we get 3 votes, then it passes. Okay, then it's the purchase is approved. Okay, well, if your bylaws are set up in such a way that the vote must occur in a public setting, again, like I say, that practice of email meetings could be problematic. Also, even if it's just one-on-one emails, if the subject is the same for each email for a quorum of the members, you're having a de facto discussion. Okay, it basically becomes a meeting. So I would caution you against using emails. Now, we need to distinguish between matters of policy and matters of an administrative nature. Okay, policy are the big issue items that should be deliberated and decided in a public setting. The administrative issues are typically, how do we go about implementing what we've already decided? Okay, so an example, public meeting, the board votes to approve the purchase of new office furniture. Okay, and that all occurs legally in a public setting. Okay, then the question comes up, what color should we get for the chairs? Okay, for the fabric. All right, that can be something that's taken care of using email because the decision has already been made. We're purchasing furniture. The smaller decision is more of an administrative nature. Yeah, well, get something neutral, earth tones, okay, that will fit in with any decor throughout the building. All right. Just go ahead and do it. Everybody agree, email, yeah, that kind of stuff, that's okay for email. The big decision has already been made per the vote. Okay, another question has popped up here. Our borough has appointed committees, building and grounds. This committee is composed of council members and has made decisions to purchase or repair in a mini split example. Is this okay? Again, I can't give you a definitive answer, but I would take a look at the definitions that we've given you. And if you think it's problematic, you have the potential for legal recourse. Okay, and we're going to talk about that towards the end of the presentation. Okay, again, I apologize. This training is not intended to determine whether or not any action taken by a board is legal or not. It's simply to give you information in how a board should operate under the Sunshine Act. If you're in disagreement with how that board is operating, you are the enforcement authority, not the Office of Open Records. Okay, let's move on. And, again, still good questions. I just need to make that clear. Okay, and Vicky, when it comes to public notice, you're getting ahead of me. So let's just wait on that. Okay, what is not a meeting? Well, I already talked about administrative action versus agency business. You can discuss administrative action outside of the public eye. Work sessions, okay? This is where I think school districts are the best example of this. They will have their monthly public business meeting, but then they'll also have like a monthly work session on the off weeks. A work session typically is a gathering of the board where the administrative staff gives information for the board's benefit for educational purposes. Typically, communication is one way. The superintendent or principals or assistant superintendents or assistant to the assistant superintendents will stand up and give status reports. They'll relay that information that they were tasked with gathering for the purposes of educating the elected board so that they can make informed decisions. Now, elected board members can ask questions of the presenter, but the board members may not discuss the merits of the presentation amongst themselves, because that would be deliberation, like we talked about earlier. So I can ask the superintendent, more detailed questions. It's just that I can't turn and face one of my fellow elected board members and say, well, what do you think of that? Okay, because that rises to the definition of deliberation, and that must occur in a public setting. Okay, so if there's no deliberation and there's no decision making, even though a quorum may be present, then it's not a meeting, and we don't have to advertise it and allow the public to attend. Okay, now moving on. Public notice. Okay, so now we can talk about Vicky's question here after we run through this slide. Under the Sunshine Act, public notice of a gathering of the board must occur at least 3 days in advance of the first regular meeting of the year. Okay, per your code, whether it be the borough code, townships code, school districts, whatever, there's typically a requirement that you meet for an organizational meeting. I think, with boroughs, it's like the first Tuesday of January or something like that. Pardon me. So 3 days prior to that, there has to be a public notice that you're going to have that meeting. It needs to be a legal notice in a paid newspaper of general circulation. Along with the organizational meeting, that typically lists the dates for all of the remaining meetings for that calendar year. So if it's the first Tuesday of the month, you would list all of those dates for that calendar year. Newspaper articles don't count. It has to be a legal notice. Websites don't count, okay? Now, if you have a website and you're using it to advertise your meetings, that's great, okay? The more you can use social media to get the word out as to when your meetings are occurring, I think that's fantastic. However, it does not meet the legal requirement as defined by the Sunshine Act. Now, I'm the first to acknowledge that there are structural changes occurring in the newspaper media, and it's becoming harder and harder to schedule these notices. If you have concerns about this, contact your legislator and let them know that you think there needs to be some consideration given to this in the language that currently exists within the Sunshine Act. But until that changes, this is what the law says. And those sales circulars that fill up our mailbox 2 or 3 times a week, they don't count either. The definition says paid newspaper of general circulation for the municipality that we're talking about. And then there also needs to be a posting, a physical posting at the meeting site. Okay, now let me back up to the question here to make sure I didn't miss anything. We were advised that we can just place all agendas on our website for the average. Okay, now you're really ahead of me with the agendas. We will be talking about that. Yeah, we'll be getting to you. Okay, now the second part, we also place ordinance introductions and passage just on the website. Is this correct? That part I don't know because that falls outside of the Sunshine Act. The requirements for the passage of an ordinance you'll find in the appropriate code that applies to your municipality or your agency. That's not covered in the Sunshine Act. So you want to take a look at those codes. Okay. Now, notice of all the meeting dates at the first of the year is in the newspaper. However, we also post at the meeting site. Yeah, that is correct. I just covered that. Good job. You were a step ahead of me here. Okay, now can you talk about subsection 709C in relation to organizations, individuals providing an envelope to the agency, particular what interested parties is? It's not defined in the law, it seems. 709C, Walt, unfortunately, I'm not familiar with that. I'd have to take a look at that and get back to you. Maybe you want to contact our office offline. 709C, I just can't, it doesn't come to mind. That you've stumped the panel. But I promise you, I'm going to take a look at that. I apologize for not being familiar with it. Yeah, it just doesn't, I'm drawing a blank. Okay. I have to move on here. So let's continue to talk about public notice. All right, we were talking about, okay, copies of the public notice. Yeah, it does ring a bell. Walt, unfortunately, this has never come up before in a question. And I would have to go back and read that section. If I recall correctly, I think the provision says that people can provide the agency with an envelope so that I think it's like a self-addressed stamped envelope. I hope I'm not really off base here, where then the agency is obligated to mail them a physical notice of the meeting. Okay. All right. And I don't mind getting off track here because, like I said, this is one that I have not looked at. In addition to the public notice required, the agency holding a meeting shall, upon request, copies of the public notice thereof, any newspaper of general circulation subdivision when held, which rarely broadcasts into political and any interested parties, if the newspaper station or party provides the agency with a stamped, okay, this is all coming back to me. If someone in advance says, I want to be notified of public meetings, and they provide a self-addressed stamped envelope to the agency, then the agency, in addition to everything else that we talked about, the public notice and a paid newspaper of general circulation, and the physical posting, they also have to provide a copy of the physical posting to the person who has provided the self-addressed stamped envelope. Okay, so they mail that out ahead of the public meeting. Okay, okay. I've read this. It's just that, guys, this question has never come up, and I've got over 10 years experience in training this. So if you've got that situation, you're unique as far as I know, but that's what the law says. Okay, so an interested party really would be anyone who provides you with a self-addressed stamped envelope. And you would provide the notice of the meeting. Okay, but that's as far as it goes. You know, interested party, again, is very subjective. I would say that the fact that they gave you a self-addressed stamped envelope qualifies them as an interested party because the law does distinguish. It uses different language in different parts. For instance, there's times when it uses the term person. There's times when it uses the term citizen. There's times when it uses the term taxpayer. But there's no definition of interested party. So I would say it's anyone who gives you an envelope at this point. And again, to my knowledge, there's no case law that clarifies that. So that's just my, just my observation here. It does not represent a legal opinion. I'm always going to be backpedaling on that. But yeah, interesting, guys. Very good. Yeah, 10 years. I've never encountered this one before. All right, but I do have to move on for the sake of all the other people waiting patiently. But, we learned something new here. Good question. All right, so we talked about, yeah, Walt, I agree. Okay. Okay, so moving on. We talked about regular public meetings as pre-scheduled. Okay. And by the way, if you have your organizational meeting and someone says, hey, there's a conflict with First Tuesdays, we need to move it to the second Tuesday. That's when we're going to have our monthly meeting. You need to re-advertise the fact that you're changing the dates. You need to run a second legal notice with the dates for the second Tuesday of the month now. Okay, if that would happen. Okay, but the law also allows you to have special meetings. And this would be where something comes up where you can't wait until next month to deliberate and decide on an issue. So you can have a special meeting. Okay, that's also open to the public. All other conditions apply. It's just that now the advance notice period goes from 3 days down to 1 day, 24 hours. Okay, but you're still, you need to keep in mind the publishing schedule for the newspaper so you get that legal notice printed at least 24 hours in advance of the special meeting. And then you can have emergency meetings where there is no requirement for advance notification, but it needs to be a bona fide emergency. I use the snowplow example. Our little borough has one snowplow. It's an old unit. It's on its last legs. We've had some problems with it, and it just broke down. And sure enough, the forecast says that there's a nor'easter coming up, and tomorrow night it's going to dump a couple feet of snow. We need a snowplow now. It turns out that there's one sitting on the lot down there that we can buy and have it in service by tomorrow. Okay, we need to have an emergency meeting of the board to vote on purchasing the snowplow. So we do that, all right? And no requirement for advance notification. All right, so the reason, and let's read this question here. When you say create, do you mean an agency, if it knows 2 months ago that an issue was coming up and they do nothing about it, then the day before they have a meeting? Probably. Okay. Walt, and it's a good question. And again, it's somewhat subjective. Typically, it's the sniff test. If it doesn't smell right with how they went about having the emergency meeting, if it looks like it's something that they're doing intentionally to subvert the Sunshine Act, they're going to get caught. And it comes back to that straight face test. If they can stand before a judge and given everything that we know, everything that's come out, if they can explain with a straight face why they waited until the very last minute and did not have a public meeting, then maybe they'll be okay. But if the judge, sees between the lines and realizes what was going on, and they usually do, judges are not stupid, then they could find themselves getting in trouble for creating the emergency that led to the emergency meeting. Okay, and this has happened. It goes back several years, but there was a school board where, someone, one of the members serendipitously recorded the chairman saying, and we're having this emergency meeting in order to get around the Sunshine Act. All right, that recording came out, and that chairperson wasn't chairperson much longer. And I believe they had to stand in front of a judge and explain themselves. Okay. Again, it's subjective, but it's kind of like the Brandeis decision. You know it when you see it. Okay. When you see create, yeah. In your example, if the plow was broken 2 months ago, they can't wait until the snowstorm to have the discussion on it, right? Again, there's always factors that may have, yeah, you answered it. Okay, good. You know it when you see it. That's the best I can say. But it's, from my perspective, that's a pretty good answer. All right. So now cancellations, and this just came up last month. It was a real life situation where somebody got sick, they wouldn't have a quorum, so they canceled the meeting, but they didn't let anybody know about the cancellation. Someone showed up and the place was locked, lights out. It's like, are they allowed to do this? Well, unfortunately, yeah. However, here's another good example where use your social media resources that if you have to cancel a meeting, put it on your website, put it on your Facebook page, tweet it out there that, hey, we weren't able to get a quorum tonight, so we're canceling or postponing the meeting or whatever. We'll see you next month. That goes a long way to avoiding problems with those people that show up and find crickets. It's just a good public service to follow through on. Okay, question came up earlier about agendas. Let's talk about this. This is a somewhat newer provision in the Sunshine Act. I think we're going on 3 years now, maybe 4, where the legislature, in response to an outpouring of concerns from the public, passed this provision, and it's somewhat newer when it comes to the Sunshine Act. But what was happening is boards would meet and not let the public know what they were going to be discussing that night. And there were some major issues that the public would otherwise be interested in that were kind of snuck in and voted on when there wasn't much attendance. So now all agencies must post an agenda of issues to be deliberated on or planned official action at least 24 hours prior to the public meeting. Okay, now this is separate from the meeting notice requirements that we talked about earlier. This only involves agendas. And if a board is going to be discussing and or voting on an issue of import, it needs to be included on an agenda that is publicly displayed. It includes regular and special meetings, which we just discussed. And it would not include those work sessions, conferences, or executive sessions, and we'll talk about executive sessions, because there's no deliberation and no decision-making that takes place during work sessions and conferences. Okay, so 24 hours advance notice of the agenda. Okay, and it needs to be on websites. But if you use Facebook instead of a website, then it needs to be on your Facebook page. You put it out there. Okay, it needs to be displayed in the agency offices, and it needs to be displayed at the meeting site. Plus, you also must have copies of the agenda available at the meeting itself. Okay, if a secretary works from home using it as a mailing address, does that count as an agency office? If there's no official office for the municipality, if her home, in fact, is the office for the municipality, then I would say she better have an agenda available there to anyone who comes in. But if there's an office that would otherwise be known as like the borough office or the township office, then yeah, it needs to be posted there at the physical office. Okay, if we have a website and Facebook page, does it need to be posted on both? No, just your website, because that's what the law says. Okay, do they hold meetings at the office? Litmus test, the home office. Yeah, I mean, that's a good way to look at it. Again, it's the lack of case law that provides guidance that makes me kind of be wishy-washy with this. I'm trying to apply common logic, common sense logic, which quite frankly is not always the case. If there were case law, I would, feel much more comfortable giving you a definitive answer. But I would say, yes, Walt. So, if there is a physical office, it needs to be there. If there's no physical office, the secretary works out of her home, which is, not uncommon, then she at least needs to have copies of the agenda there. Okay. All right. Another question has popped up. Our work session meeting notices state that a decision may be made at our work sessions. Oh my. So should the work session agendas be posted 24 hours in advance of the meeting? Carol, this is, yeah, you've tapped onto a pet peeve of mine, and that's where you call it a work session, but every component of that work session is consistent with a meeting per the Sunshine Act. Now, what you're doing is you're creating an expectation with the public, because you call it a work session and not a meeting, that nothing important is going to happen. But because you've met all of the criteria for a meeting under the Sunshine Act, you believe you can go ahead and make decisions, have votes. Again, there's no case law that says you're wrong in what you're doing, but I would caution you, again, that straight face test comes into play. If you can stand before a judge and explain why you voted for something at a gathering that you called a work session rather than a public meeting, if you think you're justified in doing that, go ahead. But I myself would not be comfortable doing that. Why did you call it a work session when you're making decisions and taking votes? Under the Sunshine Act, that's called a public meeting. Okay, so why does it appear you misled the public? All right, and I'm just arguing this as a devil's advocate because this is something near and dear to me. If it's a work session, you don't vote. If it's a work session, you don't deliberate. All right, that's for a public meeting. All right, but again, there's no case law that supports what I'm saying. All right, but if we ever get there, these are some of the things I would be worried about. Good questions, good questions. Keep them coming, keep them coming. Okay, so let's talk about the agenda some more, all right? We talked about websites, Facebook pages, agency offices, at the meeting site and available at the meeting itself so that you can hand out to people. All right, our work session. Yeah, oh, to answer your question, Carol, in that instance, I would play it safe and I would post the agenda for your work session since you might be taking votes there. But you know my concerns. All right, so let's move on and talk about the timelines and so forth. Okay, and this kind of gets back to Walt's question about what needs to be included. Okay, so how can we change the agenda? Well, there's this 24-hour window before the actual public meeting. Okay, now prior to 24 hours, you can do whatever you want when it comes to changing the agenda. Okay, but as soon as the 24-hour window hits, you can only change what is included on the agenda for de minimis items. Okay, there would be no expenditure of funds and no entering into contracts. Okay. Anything of a minor nature that is de minimis, you could change. Okay. Then we come up to during the meeting. If it's initiated by the public, once the meeting is called to order, if it's initiated by the public, the board can do whatever it wants. It can decide, okay, we're going to amend the agenda right now, or we're just going to defer it for a future meeting. But if it's initiated by the board, then you need to go through an exercise of voting to amend the agenda. Okay, so kind of what would happen is that a board member says, look, I think we should discuss this issue tonight. Okay, it can't wait. I know it wasn't on the agenda, but it needs to come up. So the chairperson or whatever would say, okay, let's vote to change the agenda. First, they need to give the reason why we're voting, okay? Because Councilman X believes that this needs to be added to the agenda. So we're going to vote. all in favor of amending the agenda to include Councilman X's issue, signify by saying aye. Okay, and they pass it. Okay, well, that becomes official action, which is memorialized in the minutes of the meeting because a vote took place. And the reason for that vote was announced to everyone in attendance. Okay, so that takes care of the first part of it. Then we come to the second part where now you have the deliberation, the public comment, and the potential for a vote. And let's just say that the board now votes on the issue, the new agenda item issue. Well, because they voted, that also becomes a matter of public record reflected in the minutes. So your minutes would say there was a vote to change the agenda and there was a vote on the new agenda item itself. Okay, and the minutes reflect that. Now, what should be included on the agenda? Okay, again, the law and this new provision within the law does not speak to how detailed you need to be. But there is some similar case law that we'll talk about when it comes to executive sessions, where it's called the Reading Eagle case, where the language, and again, this is just George talking, okay? It's not a legal opinion. I'm just applying some common sense logic here for consistency. This decision, Reading Eagle case, says that you need to provide enough information so that a reasonable person can trust you're doing it for the right reason. Okay, again, a rather subjective turn of phrase, but I think a reasonable person, I think that's a fairly effective standard. So that if you say that, if you put on your agenda that we're going to be discussing purchases, all right, that's not enough for a reasonable person to know what sort of purchases are being made and how much money you're going to be spending. Your agenda should reflect the purchases that the board is going to be approving or disapproving and the dollar amounts. Okay, and I've seen this, and many municipalities don't seem to have a problem with this. But then there are other municipalities who simply put down approval of purchases. Okay, to me, that's not enough for an agenda to explain to a reasonable person what the board is going to be talking about and what the board is going to be doing. Okay, so take a look at it from the public's perspective. All right, and if you're providing enough information on the agenda that a reasonable person is going to be satisfied, you'll be okay. If your agendas are somewhat cryptic, if they're highly abbreviated, if only a member of the board can really understand what you're going to be talking about that night, you could be facing a problem. Okay, but again, no case law to necessarily support that. Okay, Walt, I think that pretty much addresses your concerns there. Okay, if an agenda has an executive session listed on it for personal reasons. All right, you're getting ahead of me. Okay, again, another good question, and we're going to be talking about that. All right, where's my cursor? Back on the page. Here we go. Okay, public comment. Well, I'm going to be getting to executive session, so bear with me. Okay, public comment. This is another leg of the stool, another critical element to public meetings. The public is allowed to comment on issues that are or may be before the board. Okay, commenters can be limited to residents and taxpayers. This is an issue where, like those interested parties, that phrase that was raised before, if they are not a resident or taxpayer, they're allowed to attend the meeting, but they may not be allowed to comment. The board can say, if you're not a resident or taxpayer, you cannot participate in the public comment. Okay, then like I said, they have the right to comment on issues that are or may be before the board before any pertinent vote. Okay, now that phrase in there, may, is somewhat problematic because for all intents and purposes, the board may not be discussing potholes that night. But if I want to stand up and complain about potholes on my street, well, this is an issue that may be before the board at some point in the future. So I can comment on that, okay? And I'm within my rights as a citizen or as a resident, okay? Now, the board may establish reasonable rules for public comment. Typically, these are the time limits. Everyone gets 3 minutes. They can appoint spokespersons or ask that a group appoint spokespersons as a reasonable rule. And let me give you an example. Let's say that there's a big hot issue tonight. Meeting is packed. And sure enough, there's a big group where they're all wearing the same t-shirts. And every one of them is signed up for public comment. Well, as a reasonable effort to limit comment and how late the meeting is going to be, the chairperson approaches that group and says, look, how would you feel about appointing a spokesperson? And we'll give you 10 full minutes. Okay, that way we won't have a lot of repetition. All of your points will be made, and we'll get out of here before midnight tonight. Does that sound okay? And if the group is in agreement with it, then there's no violation there. Everyone's interests are being met, and you've established a reasonable rule. And, under Robert's Rules of Order, if that's how you conduct your meeting, there is a provision that allows you to vote to set the rules aside. Okay, and maybe you need to do that. But I think as everyone is working towards the same result, and you're concerned about making sure everyone has their say, you can do stuff like this. Maybe tonight you want to give everybody 5 minutes of public comment rather than 3. Okay, you can do that. All right, you just need to be aware of what are the rules under which your meetings are conducted, and almost invariably those rules have a way that you can legally set them aside. One example that has come up that was brought to our attention by some municipalities that have done this. Again, it's not part of the law, but we're just putting it out there as a best practice for you to consider our specific versus general comment periods. A specific comment period takes place on the matter on the agenda. All comments are limited to that before the vote takes place. And then you have, at the end of the night, a general comment period where the guy who complains about potholes on his street, then he can stand up and complain about the potholes. All right. Again, it's not part of the law, but it's consistent with the intent of the law. It's a reasonable rule, and it works for these municipalities. So maybe you want to consider it. Be very careful, however, when you shut people down for making comments that are not specific to what you're talking about, because you could be abrogating that person's right to free speech. Okay, and there have been some federal lawsuits where school districts in particular were found in violation of the First Amendment because they shut down a person during public comment because they weren't talking about, or they felt they weren't talking about what was on the agenda, or talking about it in such a way that was consistent with how the school district felt they should have been talking. I'm not sure whether that's under appeal. I don't think so. I think, it was decided, and, the school district got their wrist slapped, if not more, for doing that. So be careful about that. All right, some other questions have popped up. Let me go over here and backpedal, make sure I haven't missed anything. All right, executive session is going to be talking about that. Can comments be limited to written statements that are entered into the record but not allowed to be read out during the meeting? As in, no one can speak during the meeting, just sent in letters. Oh boy, no case law on that, but for me, I would find that problematic in requiring someone to submit written comments without allowing them public comment. I believe is problematic, and I'll tell you why. I have testified at legislative hearings where those legislators have said it is our intent that the public should be able to stand in front of the public officials and converse with them, to comment to their faces on why they, well, I'll just leave it at that. Okay, that tells me that it's the intent of the legislature that public comments are vocal, not written. Now, if they want to allow written comments in addition to vocal comments, that's probably okay. The practice of someone submitting written comments and then saying, I want these to be part of the minutes, I'm not aware of anything in the law that requires that. Okay, so we'll just leave it at that. Okay, based on how I've testified and the responses I got back from legislators, I believe it's the intent of the legislature to allow actual vocal public comment. Okay, yeah, good. And then the whole dynamic of written comments, that's something else. Okay, we have a committee that welcomes letters from people who would speak more than the time limit. Yeah, I've been there, done that. The committee members examine and study the input. No one has raised the issue, but are the other spectators in attendance entitled to know what's in the letters? I would say you're talking about the right to know law, which is very near and dear to this office. I would say that those letters are probably subject to discovery under the right to know law. Okay, oh boy, questions are popping up here. Let me go back and make sure I don't lose any. Yeah, the letters are more than likely subject to discovery under right to know. If they allow submission of written comments, would they have to read them out? Again, the law is silent on that, the whole idea of written letters. But again, I would say that those letters, because they are submitted during a public venue to public officials, more than likely subject to discovery under the right to know law. And I think there actually may be a provision in the right to know law that speaks to that. And you know, I'm not even going to, you know, debate it here online. I think it's clearly a public record. Okay. They would become public records held by the agency. Yes, very much. That's what I'm saying. Great idea. Oh, it's not mine. You know, that's what the law says. Okay, I think I'm down to the end of the comments. You guys are hot today. This is a hot bench. Okay. Let me see where I was at. Yeah, reasonable rules. So I think we've exhausted that. Let's move on. I got to move my cursor back to this screen. And I'm going to take a sip of coffee. And we're going to talk about executive sessions. Okay. Executive sessions are gatherings of the board that can occur outside of the public eye because of the sensitivity of what they're talking about. Okay, now they can be held before a public session, during, or after, or they can be announced for some future time that we're going to have an executive session. Okay, when the announcement is made that there's an executive session occurring, a complete reason for that executive session must be given. And here we do go to case law. The City of Reading versus the Reading Eagle, which is the local newspaper in Berks County. The practice had been for the chairperson to stand up and say, we're going into executive sessions for personnel reasons. The Reading Eagle filed suit and said, that's not good enough. The courts agreed. And there's a published decision from the Pennsylvania Commonwealth Court, Reading versus the Reading Eagle, where they go into a rather detailed analysis. And in essence, and I'm paraphrasing here, what the court says is that the reason must be sufficiently specific so that a reasonable person can trust that you're meeting outside of the public eye for legitimate reasons. You know, we go into that preamble, the very first slide, about, you know, the altruistic statements about democracy. Well, when you meet behind closed doors without the public presence, okay, you're basically asking the public to trust us, that we're doing this for honest reasons. So you need to explain enough to earn that trust. All right. So just saying for personnel reasons isn't good enough. Rather, you would say, we have a potential disciplinary issue regarding one of our employees where it's possible we may be suspending them from work. Okay. And we need to hear everybody out in order to make a decision. Okay. That tells me that it's a good reason why you're meeting behind closed doors. Or, XYZ company has filed a lawsuit against us, and our attorney wants to review our strategy that we're going to use in court in order to win the case. Okay, well, that also tells me, oh, and here's the docket number of the case. Okay, that tells me that, yeah, that is a good reason as to why you're meeting privately. Okay. And this is all kind of, you know, explained in this case, Redding versus Redding Eagle. Now, there's no requirements for minutes when a board meets an executive session. But if you do keep minutes, they are exempt from public disclosure under the right to know law. No official action can take place during an executive session, meaning that you can poll the members of the board saying, well, what do you think? You know, how do you think you're going to vote on this? But the actual vote must occur in a public session. So let's say that, you know, you're discussing this disciplinary issue. Do you think we should suspend the guy? Yeah, I'm kind of in favor of that. Okay. So you adjourn the executive session, you return to the public meeting, you reconvene, and then you take the vote. All in favor of suspending this employee for 3 business days due to the disciplinary infraction, signify by saying aye. Again, then it becomes official action and it's memorialized in the minutes of the public meeting. If you decide on a course of action during executive session, but never take an official vote during public session, then it's not an actual official action. Okay, you've made a mistake there. Okay, if the executive session about hiring a person, if they say we are having an executive session about hiring people, can they come out of the session and vote to hire a person without the hiring being on the agenda? Only the executive session. Oh my, I don't know. Common sense tells me that the vote that they're taking should be included on the agenda. Okay, but again, I can't give you a definitive answer because there's no case law to support that. But I would argue, well, now wait a minute. You're actually entering into a contract, depending on the status of the employee. So let's say it's a school board superintendent. They have their own contracts. So by entering into a contract, that is not a de minimis item. So it would require a change to the agenda. Now, if it's a bargaining unit employee where you already have a contract in place, that may be regarded differently. But I would just be uncomfortable if you're doing some hiring and it's not on the agenda. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. Okay, so let's talk about the reasons why you can go into an executive session. And Walt kind of touches on this with his questions. Personnel matters, such as hiring, firing, and discipline. And I should emphasize that it's personnel matters regarding individual people in individual positions. Okay. Personnel matters regarding policy do not qualify for executive session. So if you're talking about the leave usage, You know, the misuse of leave by a specific employee, executive session. If you're talking about overall leave policy for the employees of the municipality, that is not appropriate for executive session. Discussing labor negotiations, because you're going into, contract negotiations, yeah. Considering purchasing, leasing, or selling of property. The law says purchasing and leasing. It does not include the term selling, but there is an unwritten Commonwealth Court decision where they do extend it to selling. So that applies. If your agency is considering selling property, you can discuss that in executive session. Consulting with counsel about litigation. This would be your solicitor. Avoiding violating privilege or confidentiality. Again, usually discussions with your solicitor on legal privilege. Discussing university admission standards. I don't know, but it's there. And discussing emergency preparedness, like your evacuation plans and so forth. You can do all of that in executive sessions. Can't have one for firing an entire department agency under your control. It's going to depend on the reasons for the firing. Okay. Since you're not talking about the entire municipality, it may qualify for executive session. All right. But if it's a matter of policy, we're eliminating this department because our policy has changed on how we're going to deal with this particular social service, that may not qualify. Best answer, it depends. Okay. General contracts for, let's say, purchasing of a product can't be done through executive sessions, correct? I would think not. Okay. Again, I'm wishy-washy on it, but approval of general contracts usually is a vote that takes place in public, and the deliberation for that contract takes place in public. The reason for the executive session to discuss a contract, I think, would have to be pretty special. Oh my gosh, all these questions are popping up here and they're going off my screen. Let me go back. Okay. Should litigation be identified by court and docket number? Usually it is, okay? The threat of litigation is not good enough. Litigation usually needs to be identified with a docket number. I should say needs, but usually is, okay? And then in the aforementioned library advisory committee example, the one closed to the public, must a person nonetheless be permitted by the committee to appear to raise an objection to perceived violation of 710C? Okay, is that the public comment? 710(1)? Oh, potential litigation. Yeah, I answered that. I don't think potential litigation is good enough to justify executive session unless a solicitor can raise legal privilege in giving legal advice or guidance. Then it's possible they could fall back on that. But again, it's incumbent upon the board to give enough information about why we're going into executive session related to a potential violation of legal a violation of legal privilege to satisfy the public's right. You can't just say we're going into executive session because we're worried about violating legal privilege. You have to give me some meat, okay, some reasons to satisfy why I can no longer observe. Okay, yeah, 710C1 or 710(1)C is public participation. Okay, must a person nonetheless be permitted by the committee to appear to raise an objection? Yeah, I see where you're going with this. I'm going to say I don't see how you would do that. If you're raising an objection, your recourse, we're going to talk about in how you would do that, okay? And that may actually be the next slide. So let me go back and everyone will know what I'm talking about here and the question that you were raising. Okay, so let me go back over and advance the slide because I think that's where we're at. Yeah, violations. Okay, first offhand, public meeting. Anyone present at any time during the meeting can raise an objection that they think there's a violation of the Sunshine Act. Okay, so I can stand up and respectfully say that, look, I think what you're doing is a violation of the Sunshine Act, and I am not out of order. Okay, and the board then, can ignore me, or they can, in fact, discuss amongst themselves, whether they think they in fact have violated the Sunshine Act. And they can say, you know what, I think you're right. We missed a vote here. And so now we're going to vote on it, okay? We forgot, and we're sorry, and now we're going to do it. A board can cure its own violations by going back and doing it right. They get a do-over. Okay, and it can be, at a subsequent meeting where they might stand up and say, last meeting, we took action during executive session. That was inappropriate. We forgot to vote. We're going to vote on it now. Okay, and that cures the violation. But let's say that a person raises an objection and the board says, we disagree. We don't think we violated the act, so we're just going to move on. The recourse for that individual, or any individual for that matter, is that within 30 calendar days for a local agency, they can go to their court of common pleas, the county court, and seek legal relief. And it could be, I'd like an injunction. It could be, I'd like, some sort of discretionary relief where, maybe the vote is voided, maybe the meeting is voided, whatever. Okay, and they can file that action in court. If they believe that there is any sort of criminal culpability, they would go to the district attorney. The district attorney can investigate criminal intent, but they cannot necessarily rule on a violation of the Sunshine Act because that would be a civil complaint. Okay, now, questions have popped up here. Let me make sure I don't get too far ahead. All right, so even though if a person wasn't present at the committee meeting, but they believe that there's been a violation of the Sunshine Act because they weren't afforded the opportunity for public participation, their recourse would be to seek legal relief within 30 days of when that committee met and did not allow the public to be present. Okay, so 30 days from when the violation occurred. Okay, an objection is different from a formal legal proceeding, right? Though, yes, an objection is when I stand up during a public meeting and say, I believe you're violating the Sunshine Act. Okay, if the board does not address my objection and I feel that there's merit to it, then within 30 days of that public meeting, I would seek legal recourse from the county court, or if it's a state agency, from the Commonwealth Court. Okay, hopefully that clarifies. Okay, I didn't know about the DA investigation. If the DA is a party beholden to the agency, can you go to a DA of a different county, or how would that work? No. That comes down to legal issues outside of my wheelhorse, where you would probably, I think you're then looking at the State Office of Attorney General, probably. Okay, it's 30 days from when it happened or 90 days from when you find out about the violation, correct? No, that's not correct. It's 30 days from when it happened Or if you don't find out about it until later, that window is a year. Okay, so it would be, let's say that the board, potentially violated the Sunshine Act, but you're not aware of it. Let's say that they had an executive session, and they did some stuff, but never told the public. Okay, and you didn't find out about that executive session until a year later. Okay, the door closes 1 year after that executive session took place. Okay, after that year, you have no recourse. Okay, but you would have a year to take action. Okay, in the 90 days, that's not relevant at all. That doesn't apply. Okay, so that's how, that's your opportunity. There is no central legal enforcement authority. The Office of Open Records has no enforcement authority when it comes to the Sunshine Act. You're not going to find any agency that's enforcement. Rather, the public is the enforcement agency through their ability to go to the court and file the complaint. Typically what happens is the judge who's assigned the case will have a hearing, and that's where that straight face test comes into play. They'll hear everybody out. What's the nature of the complaint? Why do you think they violated? Mr. Elected Official, how do you respond? Or, Mr. Elected Official Solicitor, how do you respond? And then they'll make a decision, okay? Judges in recent years have used a variety of sanctions in order to address violations of the Sunshine Act. They have the ability to, just a slap on the wrist, say, don't do it again, or I'm going to void this vote. You need to go do it again. Or this is so egregious, I'm going to void the entire meeting, okay, because you didn't allow the public to participate or whatever. In one case, it was for technical reasons, okay, and they decided, well, even though everybody online, the connection has been cut, we're going to proceed with the meeting. The judge says, oh, no, you're not. I'm voiding the entire meeting. Go do it again. And judges can institute fines up to $1,000 for the first violation. The fine is paid by the public official, not the agency. It comes out of your own pocket. And if it's the entire board that the judge finds in violation, then all the board members can pay or end up paying up to $1,000. Now, this has not occurred in recent history. I'm not aware of any actual fines. I do know of an instance where the judge required Sunshine Act training because things were so bad for the elected officials and some of the employees of the agency. And the judge says, you guys, you have no idea what you're doing. You got to get, and I probably shouldn't be putting it that way, but you got to get Sunshine Act training. And they sent them to us here at the Office of Open Records. We conducted the training for everybody that the judge identified. And then we sent a letter to the judge saying that, okay, these guys have received the training now. Your order has been met. And the judge, sent us a nice letter saying, thank you very much. Can the judge institute a fine when a member of the public brings it to court, or only when the DA as a criminal matter? Okay, you're talking about two separate things. The judge can institute a fine in the civil proceeding related to a violation of the Sunshine Act. The DA would only investigate alleged criminal culpability, and that is handled as a separate matter in a criminal proceeding, opposed from the Sunshine Act violation proceeding, which is civil. Okay. For a committee formed by commissioners who gets to decide if the Sunshine Act applies to the committee meetings, the commissioners or the committee itself? Okay, so if I understand this right, there's a committee just to decide if the Sunshine Act applies. And then they go back to the commissioners and make a recommendation pursuant to statute. Okay, you see where I'm going here? So go back through my notes, and I think you'll find the answer to your question. Would the solicitor be considered an official? Yes. Under the right to know law, and more than likely under the Sunshine Act, in typical municipal jurisprudence, the solicitor is considered a de facto public official, as in they gave advice to the board. Would they be held liable if that advice appeared to be willfully wrong? Oh boy, I'm not going there. Okay, Walt, it's a very good question. It's not something that is part of the Sunshine Act or the Right to Know law or anything that the Office of Open Records per se would be involved with. That falls outside our jurisdiction. It's probably case specific, and it would be up to the judge to decide. On the issue of fines, if an agency pays for insurance for the official, would that insurance policy be able to pay the fine? Not the way I read the Sunshine Act, okay? The official pays the fine. It comes out of their pocket, and I think the intent there is pretty clear as to why it should be the official, okay? I don't believe that the insurance company, which is employed by the agency, would be permitted to pay the fine on behalf of the public official. The official pays, not the agency. Okay, another good question. Okay, moving on here. I got to move over to the right screen. Okay, miscellaneous stuff before we close it up for the day. Okay, under the code, meeting minutes must be recording. Oh, I'm sorry, this is actually under the act itself. The minutes must record what public officials were there, who was there, and who voted. You know, usually it's an up or down vote, so the minutes would reflect whether it passed or was defeated. If there's a roll call vote, then the vote of each public official must be reflected in the minutes. The public can record meetings unannounced, and it would not be considered a violation of the Sunshine Act or the Pennsylvania wiretap law. So I can set my cell phone on record, put it in my pocket, go into the public meeting, record everything that's being said, and it is not a violation of the law. Furthermore, the municipality itself, the agency, can record the meeting. Usually what I recommend is at the beginning of the meeting, the chairperson, when they're making their introductory announcements, include that there's no expectation of privacy at this public meeting, and that, you know, it may very well be recorded by someone right now, or they might say, and we're recording the meeting. If the agency is recording the meeting, that is a public record subject to discovery under the right to know law for as long as that recording is in the possession of the municipality. Okay, they are public records. All right, can an agency stream the meeting without recording it, or do they have to keep a copy afterwards? There is no requirement that an agency record a public meeting, okay? But if they do, then it is considered a public record. And depending on whether it's a borough, a township, or whatever, if they are subject to the Municipal Records Act, then the recording is kept, I believe, that the language is that they keep it until the next regularly scheduled meeting, or for as long as there's an administrative need to do so. All right, again, somewhat subjective language, but not really subjective. I mean, the next business meeting, then they would be allowed to delete the recording if they recorded it in the first place. Okay, but take a look at the Municipal Records Act. Not all entities necessarily need to follow the Municipal Records Act. For instance, school districts do not. Authorities do not. They may fall under other codes, but not the Municipal Records Act. Okay, so we are at the end of the presentation. If you have any further questions, now's a good time to get them in. In the meantime, I'm just going to talk about the website real quickly. It is a wealth of resources. If you're interested in the Sunshine Act or the Right to Know law, you can find all kinds of resources on there, a citizen's guide, agency guides, and the like. Oh, thank you for your nice comments, folks. Yeah, you guys, today you've been what we call a hot bench, where if you're an attorney and you're arguing before a court and everybody's quiet and half asleep, quiet bench. If they ask a lot of tough questions, then it's known as a hot bench. Okay. Do the specific reasons for going into executive sessions need to be recorded in the minutes? No, not necessarily. But they do need to be stated to the public. Is this session recorded? Oh my. Like I explained at the beginning of the session, usually they are, but we've been having some technical difficulties lately. I did hit record at the beginning. Whether or not the big system recorded it successfully, I don't know. Teresa, contact the office in a couple days to see how we made out, okay? And if it was successfully recorded, it'll be posted on the website within a few days. Can a member of an agency lie during a public meeting? Okay, Walt, I'm not going there. Okay. Yeah. I have audio. Okay, well, that's good. And yeah, I think you can record locally these team sessions. Okay, you have a number of people in Bradford County thankful and would love to listen. Okay, well, like I said, if we haven't recorded it, it's due to technical reasons. Okay, I think we're at the end of the session. All right, but I want to, thank you again. I'm going to log off. Yeah, no fire alarm, right. Take care, folks. Have a good week. Enjoy the rest of your day, and hopefully we'll see you in 2 weeks when we do our next webinar. Take care and God bless.